Bene, buon pomeriggio allora.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. This is a very simple title, Testimonies from the Border. Borders are a very important place, an encounter where we can receive a proposal, and the other enriches himself thanks to what they meet. Testimonies are the simplest way through which we can convey and communicate something. Facts so fascinating that they attract everyone. And this is even more important nowadays. Because in order to convey our message, it is not enough to talk and discuss, but we need to bring our testimony. As the Pope himself said in his message to the meeting, calling us on to detect all of the signs of the need for God, of our desire of God, in order to answer the inner questions of our heart. And so this is what we're trying to do, try and find the signs of God through our friends, through the encounter with the other. And so following the Pope's remarks, we decided to invite our guests today. On my right, Marco Pozza. Let's give it up for Marco. He's 37 years old. He is priest in the prison of Padua, not a chaplain but a priest. In the prison of Padua, it is very important to see how the Pope always goes and visits prisons. And the Pope, every time that goes to the prison, he says, well, I could be here instead of you, establishing a relationship with the inmates. Marco works in the prison of Padua. We, as the meeting, know the prison of Padua very well, and we always learn from this place. So we'll listen to his speech. And from Argentina, we have Ignacio Morel. He was born in 1966. He has 5 sons, 5 children, and he is in charge of the opera Padre Mario Pantaleo, an Italian priest from Pistoia who moved to Argentina to a very poor area in terms of money, but very rich in humanity, and he created the opera Padre Mario Pantaleo. Later on, I'll give you a few figures, but figures only help us understand the importance of the deeds of man, of the encounter with the other. You have created a school with 3,000 students, and then a small hospital, care centers for elderly people, a center for sports activities for young people. And so whoever goes to this center is able to find the truth through the encounter with the other. And so they're here to share with us their testimony. Let's start from Don Marco, Father Marco, about the prison of Padua, and we'll start with a video about the situation in Padua. Today, we'll embark on a journey of discovery in a prison. For many of you, it is the first time in a prison. We've never been in a prison. We know prison through videos or books, and we don't know the inmates. And maybe behind every inmate, we can find God Himself. So inmates could be just like a work of art, and maybe you will find a great discovery in them. This is the entrance of the house to 600 men with a life sentence. In the gospel we'll listen to tomorrow, Jesus says, "If you love me, you will comply with my teachings." And we will try and find this in this prison. And I'd like to ask you, Anna Maria, this is the first time for you in a prison, in a male prison. How does it feel like? Well, I think that I will benefit from this experience, even though I'm also a bit worried, concerned, but I am really eager to listen to the stories of these people who lost their path in life, but people who are willing to start again. So let's go and find the other and what it really means to love the other. In this area, around 400 people live. They were sentenced for regular crimes. And in the other area, we have the high security part. And so this is where we live, this is where we work as priests, with a lot of people. It is a very small space, but with a lot of people. Usually, during the day, in order to reach the cell of an inmate, I have to go through thousands of gates. And the gate is the key image of the prison, the image and the symbol of freedom, but also of detention. So this is the place of the encounter. Around 10,000 people among schools and parishes come in order to listen to the stories of inmates. This afternoon I'd like to tell you the story of Arman. In the Gospel there is a very nice image. Jesus says, "I will not let you be orphans, but I will send you the Holy Spirit." For a very long time I studied the Gospel. And then after I received the communion and christening. You choose your own name. You choose Davide. Why is that? Well, I wanted a big change in my life. I wanted to show God that I was able to change. I was able to change my life. So as Jesus says in the gospel, I will not let you be orphans. In your own life, there was a very important moment, the moment when you met Pope Francis. Well, yes, I really wanted to bend down in front of the Pope. And it was a very important moment that I will always remember. Davide, which was the spark that triggered in you this thirst and the will to convert? Well, it was a very special part of the gospel. Jesus, before entering the temple, said, God, have pity for me. And then he washed the eyes of the blind in order to see things. That's how I felt myself, a new gaze in order to look at the world. And so this is how you were saved, through a new gaze.
Qui ci troviamo ad uno degli incroci del nostro.
This is one of the main crossroads of our prison. People come here, they pass from here, and then they go educate themselves. You cannot escape from here. Jesus in the gospel says, the world will never see me again, but you will keep seeing me and you will keep experiencing me. Together we've seen the face of God in the face of the inmates. Federico, when you enter the prison, you enter it with that image on your mind, and then you leave the prison with another feeling. Well, that's true. When you hear about stories about the prison, about inmates, it is very different from really meeting inmates, listening to their stories. And it is very striking to me to think that after this day, I will go home and I will be able to do anything I want, whereas they will have to stay here. So when you enter the prison, you feel nervous, and then when you leave the prison, you feel relief. Well, that's true. I cannot even properly express the way I feel, the way I felt after this encounter. It was very moving for me to be here. It is very weird to be a woman in the middle of a bunch of men, a bunch of male inmates, just like God among people. Well, yeah, that feeling gave me peace. I felt at peace, thanks to God. It is my first time in a prison. And after a while of uncertainty, now I can say that I feel really happy. I was happy to listen to their stories, just like Davide's stories. They realized all the wrong things that they did, and now they're willing to change their life, and I wish them the best of luck. Thank you. This Sunday's Gospel says, "Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them myself." And this is the image of the happiness of people who came into the prison and then go back home and feel happier because they met God through inmates.
I know man quite well. I am the one who made him. This is a strange being because he has that freedom, which is the mystery of mysteries. We could also ask of him more, but what we cannot ask of him is hope, a little bit of trust. A bit of abandonment into my hands of a disposition towards me. When I read this, taken by a work by Charles Péguy, I didn't understand if it was my eyes that was reading these words, or it was these words that were reading my life. Because I experienced what the beauty of literature is, that in reading it, it allows you to read and read into your own history. So there were two possibilities to give voice, to give my brothers a voice that live in prison. The first way was very simple, was to try to narrate all the goodness that is born from evil. Within waste, we can find a precious pearl. It could have been something banal or something additional to things that you already know. And the friends that 20 years ago that I met made a great bet that today man who fell down, if you love him, he can stand up again. And this is true for me today. This is something very beautiful, and I think something that I experienced myself, because the meeting is evident, it has the same experience. If I see a fire, I don't like to extinguish it. I like to wet it and put more petrol, so as it were. I had a fistful of people who were very, very headstrong, and they are completing an exceptional miracle and are converting a very hard heart of a priest that is passing the best years of his priesthood in prison. That place that since he was a child, people had told him to hate. And today we are speaking a lot about legacy, inheritance, etc. And I come from a great land, a very live territory, which is the northeast. And this is how I was educated. I was given this inheritance, that men make mistakes, and if they make mistakes, they must be put into prison, and you have to close that prison with the key and throw it away. Today, I decided to start from this point because my salvation maybe in a bourgeois sense, began with that sentence that I fostered in my heart many years ago, before the title of the meeting, even from the first days of my priesthood, and it's a very beautiful sentence. Whatever you inherit from your fathers, and you are earn it in order to possess it. I decided to do this with the people in prison. In order to say that I am an heir, it is not enough to receive an inheritance by my father, my mother, my grandfather, but it is necessary that this inheritance, which is a beautiful gift, the gift of having encountered Christ, and I even inherited it from my own childhood, from the moment that I was born. This enviable good, if in order to avoid that this become something dead, that this be extinguished, I needed to, according to Giussani, to become a serious work in my life, in order for it to become an adult faith with those people, the people that I did not love, that I was not able to love. Poor people are teaching me to simplify myself and to simplify how I see the world, because they see flesh. Whatever they see, what is concrete is what they believe. I am a priest who began to see, and I'm trying to understand, someone once said, the poor people will evangelize us, and this is exactly what is happening to me. From the son of Paul of Tarsus, with very strong certainties, he began to learn from poor people, and it is better to have an extra doubt, maybe a doubt in excess rather than a false certainty. And the great figure of Nicodemus is the symbol of my faith, of this faith that makes me sometimes lose, which makes me desperate, and nurtured by stories that are terrible. I often fight with God. Faith is a love story. Like all the love stories that we have in here, sometimes I say to God, maybe let's not see each other too much for a while. Because, why this? Because experiencing the same experience of Nicodemus is what I experience. We must be reborn from above. My grandmother found me. I'm understanding something great in prison, that it is not enough to be born once, to say that we have lived as men of God. So how can one be reborn? Nicodemus says, do I have to go back into my mother's womb? Jesus says, it is love that will be able to transform you. This is exactly what happened to me. I was seduced by God since the day that I became a priest, allowing me to think I would have the life that I thought I would have. This, after being seduced, I was opened to the possibility that I lived the life that God was dreaming for me. That beautiful exhibition of Claudio Chieffo at one point said, Once a master, a singing teacher told me, if a song is not something that opens up to a landscape, then it is just useless noise. And a window that opens up to the infinite, then it is useless noise. From this, the new perception, that the new concept that people who force me to stay in front of the reality of history. The certainty in Giussani's books. I am not a part of CL. Don Giussani, for me, was a priest like many others, but I perceived the beauty, the charism, the freshness of his heart, which lived within the words of some of his witnesses, of some of these testimonies. The inheritance that the Giussani has left it lives on in the people who have been able to earn and possess it. Christianity allows us to see once more reality that we all see, but it allows us to see reality in a different way. It allows us to see within reality, to experience what happens every day. There are people who see the sun and say, this is a yellow dot, and there are people who see a yellow dot and they say, this is the sun. This is a miracle, in the sense that it is not our doing. Witnesses, testimonies are like postmen. At some point, when everybody sees evil, and this is why I love these people, there was someone that accepted to be changed and surprised by God, and use their talents, while everybody only saw their sins. This, for me, is what it means to be able to be an entrepreneur of God, generating always new beginnings in history that everybody would normally say stories that people would never expect anything to happen. We are we have an advantage, in a sense, being with poor people, because many times I have read and reread the gospel like I used to read, like I used to watch foreign movies. And now, within prison, if someone asks me, what was the most amazing discovery you made in prison, Don Marco? And I can't avoid using Carran's words here when he talks about the inflamed point within the experience of poverty. And listen up, I'm not happy about poverty, but I cannot, but in this experience of prison, we have this inflamed point, the charity of God's word. I'm not particularly passionate about cinema. One of the 3 films that I like, I watched it for the 37th time. It's called The Postman by Massimo Troisi. I was seduced by the Beatrice Otruso of the time. in this movie, there is a short dialogue when Beatrice's grandmother goes to the parish priest and tells her about her preoccupation, her worry. My granddaughter is seduced by this postman. This postman, with metaphors, he was able to seduce and direct my granddaughter. But the same thing that the postman was doing with Beatrice is the same thing that these prisoners are doing with my life. Using metaphors by God warm my heart and help me. They allow me to see myself as within God's word. This is not simple. This is not easy. There are certain times when I wake up and I say to myself, remember, Marco, that today God has decided to trust you with these people. Maybe this is one of the intuitions that I also read of the subsidiary. I love this an editorial line which is freshness and where the heart is alive, which is clear in the subsidiarity. This article spoke about Guardini and other great thinkers who saw Christianity and saw in Don Giussani's words a present presence, like a heart which is in love and suffering at the same time. I strongly believe in Satan, and with the same strength of belief that I believe in God. Those days in which I stay in front of the gate of the prison and I realize that what I'm about to start is useless and that I should not even start working. When I think this, I think of that great page of Zacchaeus that Pope Francis used as a letter to begin this meeting, and that I went to read in the Cardinal Giacomo's letter. He quotes an expression of Saint Augustine. Zacchaeus was looked at by God and he began to see. This is marvelous. Zacchaeus sees Jesus, Jesus sees Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus sees his life in a different way to before. My wish for you is this. I wanted to just share a piece of my road with you because my inheritance is a sort of inheritance. My mother who taught me how to pray, my granny who taught me how to pray, my father showed me in some other ways that God exists. And today, when I wake up, to say that I am a believer, I need to say to myself, I need to ask myself, why do I still believe in God today? I could say, well, I don't really know deep down why. Don Lorenzo Milani with that nonchalance. Don Lorenzo Milani once said, there are people who ask me if I believe in God. And he said, I don't believe in the existence of God. This is fantastic. Or imagine this in the Curia in Florence at the time. But they had to let him finish speaking. I don't believe in the existence of God, but I love God. And loving a person is much more than believing in their existence. To love someone is much more than believing in their simple existence. And knocking on Don Giussani's door we have the same issue. The difference between believing in the existence of someone and loving someone. This is where the match is played out in my life in prison at the moment, between these two alternatives.
Grazie.
Thank you, Father Marco. This dialogue with God is really spectacular. And now I'd like to ask Horacio to share his experience. You have the floor. Thank you, everyone.
Allí, el padre Mario Pantaleo fundó su obra.
There, Father Mario Pantaleo created his opera in a very profound Christian spirit. Today, we are a non-governmental organization which works hard in order to support families in their development through the support of companies, volunteers, and donators. Father Mario created an open school without any kind of discrimination, intended to achieve a complete training of the person, of the individual. And so through our school and our organization, we try to convey our message through social assistance. We support the families who are in need in our community. We provide training for children between 6 and 16 years old through different activities and sports. In the Plaza de Arte and Oficios, young people train themselves in order to prepare for the labor market together with many companies from the area. In González Catán, in Buenos Aires and Santa Fe, we provide trainings in many sectors for disabled people in order to help them integrate in society. For elderly people, we organize assistance together with healthcare professionals. Over the past 30 years, we've been providing a professional service and healthcare services, and we provide drugs for free. Through different sports, we promote responsible activities through sports and the care of the body of the person, together with professionals, sports professionals. All of the areas that we're seeing in the video reflect not only the desire of the person who created all of this, it is not just the person that creates and makes things possible, it is the community. And this is what we invest in. A person with a desire and with a willingness to sacrifice themselves. I am waiting for him to be declared saint, because Father Mario was a saint. And so this is what I am waiting for him to be proclaimed saint.
Bien. ¿Se escucha bien? Sí.
Se escucha, se escucha.
Bueno, para dar un poco de...
So in order to contextualize the work that we carry out in the opera Padre Mario, I will first of all contextualize the story of Argentina and the situation we live in. There are a lot of difficulties and paradoxes in Argentina. As a country, we've invested in the scientific field and in sports, and also because we are also well known because we are a very open people. We have 5 Nobel Prize winners: Nobel for Peace, Medicine, Chemistry. However, Argentina is also a very divided country. Over the past few years, because of populist governments which managed the country, there's been a great divide in society, even from a cultural point of view. There are a lot of migrants in Argentina. In 1870, in Argentina there were over 1 million inhabitants, and the area was over 1 million square kilometers, twice as big as Italy. From back then up until 1940, 4.5 million migrants arrived, and among these migrants, Padre Mario arrived as well. The majority of these migrants came from Spain and Italy. Most of them were Italians. And this is why we have a say in Argentina, which says that Mexicans come from Aztecs, Peruvian people come from Incas, but we, the people from Argentina, come from ships. In fact, the most important representative of the Argentine literature, Mr. Borges, who personally met the Pope, said that it didn't really feel Argentine because he had Italian blood in his veins. Today, there are 44 million people in Argentina, of whom 32% is really poor, despite of the fact that we have enough food in Argentina, and that food could be enough for the population. We have an unemployment rate which accounts for 10%, and there is a great gap between poor people and unemployed people. This ratio can be explained in two ways. First of all, society does not create employment. There is no entrepreneurial spirit. The other reason is that the policy of the government giving benefits and subsidies to the community eliminated the desire of people to make progress in life and move on. And so many policymakers started creating a sort of dependence of people from the state. Nowadays, many people, the majority, receive benefits from the state. And this is why, a few days ago, I was really sad when I read in the latest biography about Pope Francis, a biography by a English journalist, and I read that Argentina was a sort of unkept promise. As we saw On the video, Father Mario was born in Italy in 1915, and in 1924, when he was a kid, he moved to Argentina with his family. They arrived in Buenos Aires on a ship called Principessa Mafalda, Princess Mafalda, which 3 years afterwards was known as the Italian Titanic because it sank in front of Brazil. 500 people died on that ship. They were all poor people. And had a ticket for the third class. Among these people, there were also the family of Pope Francis had a ticket for that ship, but they could not embark on that journey, and they stayed in Turin because they had a bar in a cafe in Turin, and they had sold the cafe in order to afford the journey to Argentina, but they could not afford that in time, and so they put off the voyage, and so they did not die on that ship. After being ordained priest in Italy, Father Mario volunteers and goes back to Argentina as a missionary. And he started working in a few parishes and hospitals. He goes visiting ill people every day, and that's when he discovers that he had a gift, perceiving the spiritual and physical pain of people, and also to understand what kind of illness they were affected with. And in some cases, he could even treat their diseases through his hands. And so he became very popular, and many people went over to him in order to find a treatment or a cure for their disease. Many people were really thankful to him. Among these people, there was also the woman that we saw at the end of the video, Mrs. Perla. Mario's father was diagnosed with a very severe disease, and she only had 6 months of life. But as we've seen in the video, she has over 90 years, and so he could treat her disease. In 1972, Mario is 57 years old and sets up this social opera in the area of González Catán, which is the poorest area in the periphery of Buenos Aires. So he starts organizing social assistance for poor people, opens a church, a residency for elderly people, a nursery for kids, and then starts building a church and a hospital. And then he dies in 1992. And after that, his friends continue to work and to build on what he had done. Many friends of his contributed to the growth and to the creation of the opera. Not only people who were really thankful to Father Mario for what he had done when he was alive, but even people in Italy who knew about the opera and then decided to give their contribution. For example, the Oldrini family, who, in order to honor their child Silvia, helped us a lot and supported us and donated in order to create many buildings. After Padre Mario died, the family who continued to support the opera proved to be really capable of supporting the opera, and they were aware of the fact that they somehow had to guarantee the Catholic profile of the opera. And so they started looking for different aids and supports among churches. A few years had passed and they had not achieved this goal. And then a friend of them, Leonora, invites Mrs. Perla to the presentation of Don Giussani's book, The Religious Sense, in 1999, a presentation led by Pope Francis. At the end of the presentation of the book, Mrs. Perla goes up to Cardinal Bergoglio, presents herself, introduces herself. Bergoglio recognizes her immediately because the opera was very popular in Buenos Aires, and Bergoglio says that they could count on him in order to collaborate. And so, simply through an encounter, this is how our friendship started between the Communion and Liberation Movement and the opera of Padre Mario. At the beginning, we worked together with the AFSI Foundation, and we created the so-called Plaza de Artes y Oficios, the Square of Arts and Professions, similar to the one that was already created in Turin. And after that, Antonella De Giorgi arrived. She was willing to work for the opera. And as time went by, we worked harder and harder on a daily basis for the opera. Father Mario founded many schools, secular schools, but nevertheless, he talked about Christ to kids through catechesis. And a few years ago, my wife Claudia and I, we began a catechesis in the Salesian style. You know, the courtyard, all of the games with the kids. And we immediately realized something which is extremely connected, related to the topic of the meeting. The kids did not know anything about Christ. We needed to start from scratch with them. Bergoglio experienced something very similar in Chile when he studied there, And back then, he wrote a letter to his sister telling her about all the difficulties they were encountering, all the difficulties the people of Chile encountered. They were hungry people, always cold. And at a certain point, he says, well, and the worst thing is that they know nothing about Jesus. As Fernando de Aro, our friend, said, we live in times when Christianity as a form of life has almost disappeared. And this is why countries like Argentina, with a very important tradition of popular religion, if we are not able to revive Christianity, if we're not able to reinforce it in our daily life, we run the risk of losing this tradition. In his introduction to Borghesi's book, Fernando said that we have the church, and then the institutions and Christian morality. But what is really Christian, a simple fact that accompanies and affects with a sense of hope the life of a people, that is something that turned the Christian people into something that is only material. From our experience in the opera of Padre Mario, we see that there is hope for all of the people that we care for, but especially for ourselves. And that is believing in God. And this is something that happens because we're all human. Our friend, Father Charlie Oliveiro, one of the famous priests from the Visions of Bergoglio, always says that when reading the Gospel, we do it because we look for the human side of Jesus. We want to learn how to be human just like him. Our presence in the opera of Padre Mario is complicated, of course. As I said at the beginning, there is a great divide in Argentina. It is an ideological gap. And we see that this ideological gap is present even in our opera, in a place with 750 workers. It is the largest social opera in Argentina, and half of these workers are educators and trainers. In March, on March the 24th, in Argentina, we celebrate Memorial Day because it is the anniversary of the last military golpe. The history of Argentina in the 20th century is the history of political instability. The latest golpe was very severe because it led to illegal repression. Many people disappeared. Many people were arrested. And many people were killed and then launched into the ocean. There were a lot of common pits. We work hard in order to find reconciliation, and so we proposed a meeting. And we had invited the son of a person who had disappeared, and the son of a soldier who was in prison because he committed a crime against humanity. These two people are friends now and created a group working in favor of reconciliation in Argentina. Unfortunately, the trade unions of teachers reported us because they said that we were doing an apology of dictatorship, hiding the fact that we had invited the son of a desaparecido, only stating that we had invited the friend of a soldier who was in prison. There was a protest on the street, which was really bad, and so it was a very difficult moment. At the end of the day, it was a very difficult day. Our General Director, Gabriel Laurino, went in front of Father Mario's mausoleum to pray and rest. And in that moment, there were 3 young people. They were really sweaty. And he had realized that there were 3 pilgrims. They had been walking for a really long time, so he asked them where they came from. And they had walked over 40 kilometers. And then he asked them to tell him their story. And he asked them if they had any recommendation for him as a general director of the opera. They were very simple people coming from the same area where Father Charlie works, and one of them said, "Never forget that this is a holy place."
Some of the things that Pizzaballa said really struck me. Because it forces us to think of the reasons why we are involved in an initiative of this kind. At the end of his speech, he said the following: "We must start from what makes us new within a diversity. We're not supposed to find uniformity, to uniform ourselves." And then he spoke about the sense of community, which, as you saw at the end of the video, was truly the sense of Padre Mario, to live the community. Thank you. We thank our friends once more. I think it has emerged very clearly that in this period, that in these times, nobody recognizes Christ, and we can't say that we really know him deep down. The possibility of getting to know him, nobody can explain this to us. We can only encounter him in changed lives through the provocation of life, of facts that leave our hearts restless, through which we understand that everything has a meaning. It is reality that helps us to understand how much we are in need of Christ. And this is why we can understand also what the Pope said and what he continues to say to us about being witnesses. Only in this way we can understand the urgency and the need for Christ. How does the great tradition of faith arrive to us? How does Christ's love arrive? Through the multitude of testimonies that after 2,000 years continue to renew the event of Christ and enable us to live the experience of the beginning like those who first met him. We understand through the testimonies of these two friends how they lived the experience of the beginning and how they generate an experience of new beginnings, generating new beginnings, not replicating old experiences, but generating new ones. This happens through an interesting manner, a very simple manner, because what they explained are facts which are very simple but dramatic at the same time, but simple, without particular ideological constructions, without discourses, but life. Father Pizzaballa, very many things struck us about his intervention yesterday and are linked to what was said today. Don Marco earlier on used an expression: we must accept simply to be surprised by God and put our talents into play. And Pizzaballa yesterday said something very similar, almost the same. We must start from what makes us different and what makes us new. This operation of becoming new begins from the small things like a talent, just like what I have been given during my life. We have this great possibility to rediscover Christ's presence and generate new beginnings, and this is what the world needs, this great possibility to accept what has been given to us in reality. This is one of the most beautiful things in life. The same thing that Marco lives is the same novelty that is generated in Padre Pantaleo's work. We have the chance to experience it once more in our lives. and we can rediscover it during these days. So we're grateful for them. We thank them once more with an applause. I just wanted to exchange my thank yous to you, because my way of saying thank you to you was to share a piece of my road, my journey with you. I wanted to make a final wish with this sentence. I don't know where I got it from, but I don't mind, because as Pablo Neruda used to say, poems aren't for those who wrote them, but for those who feel them. Reclaim the memory during which his eyes met mine. Reclaim the memory of the moment in which his eyes met mine. When we were talking about Zacchaeus earlier, when desperation tends to attack us and overcome us, like in any love story, we must reclaim that moment in which his eyes met ours. This is the only way to go back to rediscover this journey. Thank you. The meeting exists for this reason, and it lives for this reason. If we are aware of this, we can help to replicate gestures that help this. To help the meeting to live longer, to keep going, we invite you to donate in the Dona Ora desks. This is not a formality, but something very concrete that helps to continue what has begun here. Thank you, good afternoon, and have a good meeting.